everyone. The experience of elation that I felt on Tuesday with Trump's election has not in any way subsided. And let us pause to reflect the momentousness of that accomplishment. No man has gone to the White House not coming from elected office since Eisenhower. And Eisenhower, as you know, the supreme commander of World War II. So what Trump has done on Tuesday is unprecedented, and in some ways, no one else could have pulled that off. I'm trying to describe the feeling that I had in seeing those election results, and I think the best analogy I can think of, it was kind of a prison break feeling. Kind of the experience that we saw in the Shawshank Redemption of breaking out of captivity. And while this has forced a kind of rethinking on the left, I think it also compels us to do a little bit of rethinking on the right. Because how did Trump win Pennsylvania, Michigan, it seems, Wisconsin? He did it by appealing to a group of people that we have been trying to court for 30 years with only moderate success. These are the blue-collar, working-class guys. These are the so-called Reagan Democrats. And of course, Reagan got them. But Republicans couldn't win them ever since Reagan. The Republican strategy for winning the blue-collar vote was essentially to appeal to social issues and hope that the social issues and the kind of social conservatism of working-class America would, you may say, trump its economic concerns. The genius of Trump was to appeal to those voters on both economic and social issues. And in doing so, Trump appears to have violated, you may say, conservative orthodoxy. This is actually the reason why so many of our friends have been, if not ambivalent, thrown into outright opposition. Because in order to win blue-collar votes, Trump appears to have violated the sort of libertarian principle of free trade. I want to say a word to defend the idea that Trump has actually not done that. What he has actually done is to help us to understand that economic principles are meaningless if they don't have some legitimate political translation. Trump's point is that free trade is merely a nostrum if it is only conformed to on one side. In other words, if we have free trade, but the Japanese and the Chinese have tariffs, that's not really free trade. And to say to the Japanese, in effect, if you insist on having tariffs, we're going to put up some tariffs until you take yours down. That's not a violation of free trade. That is actually an attempt to actually have it. During the Civil War, it became a practice of the Confederacy to execute free blacks who were captured by the Democratic South. And upon learning of this, by the way, the Confederates would not execute white captives. They would just put them into camps, but they would execute the blacks. When Abraham Lincoln found out about this, he issued an executive order that for every free black executed by the South, one Confederate soldier should be shot. Now again, taken by itself, this might seem a barbaric violation of the rules of war, but Lincoln's point is that there has to be a certain amount of proportionality on both sides. And that if one side stops playing by the rules, it's entirely legitimate for the other to do so until a certain kind of equilibrium is restored. Now, this by the way of introducing what I think is going to be a very exciting, but even for us, a period of rethinking of what the Republican Party stands for and what conservatism means now. I want to say a word about Hillary's America and about the point of making that movie. It was actually very hard to make a movie about Hillary. And the reason is, everyone can't stand her. How do you that was not the case with Obama 4 years ago. Obama, although in many ways repulsive, was at the same time weirdly fascinating. And so you could make a movie that tried to get inside of Obama. But with Hillary, to make a movie for 90 minutes or 100 minutes on Hillary would make the audience want to shoot itself in the head. So for this reason, I thought it's important to make a movie not just about Hillary, but the Hillary gang. And even though Hillary now is happily moving off the scene, as we can see, the Hillary gang is very much here. It's not going away. This Hillary gang thrives on fanaticism. It thrives on a lot of the kind of bullying tactics that we're seeing now in the country. But weirdly, for a gang, it has enjoyed something that gangs have never had. It's enjoyed something that, for example, Luca Brasi did not have as a member of the Corleone clan, and that is moral legitimacy. Moral legitimacy. The point of the movie Hillary's America was to attack that. The Democratic Party has claimed now for 50 years that we are the party of the little guy, of the ordinary guy. We're the party of the outsider. We're the party of women and Latinos and blacks. We did civil rights. We deliver human rights. And so we are the party of progress. The Republicans are the party of stopping progress. And so this combination of claiming justice and claiming the future, this has been the key to the success of the Democratic Party. And the lesson for us in all this is it is important to dismantle this kind of moral claim that the Democrats have made. The central argument of Hillary's America was simply that the Democratic Party is the deadly enemy of the ordinary man. The Democratic Party has been the underminer, the subjugator, the enslaver, the exploiter, the lyncher of blacks and other minorities. Far from being the champion of women, the Democrats have been the enemies of women's suffrage and women's rights. Now, faced with all this, the progressive scholars who have actually dominated American historiography, American textbooks, have a comeback. And their comeback is the idea of the big switch, which is the idea that the two parties sometime in the 60s or sometime relatively recently made a racial swapping of sides. Essentially, the racist Democrats all became Republicans. Challenging the big switch was the main intellectual challenge of this movie and my accompanying book, Hillary's America, because to my knowledge, the big switch had never been publicly debunked. It had never been publicly refuted or destroyed. And the reason it hadn't been destroyed is that it seems to rest on two facts that are completely incontestable, namely blacks who used to be Republicans did become Democrats, so they did switch. And the white South, which used to be overwhelmingly Democratic, is now largely Republican. So there was a second switch. And so these two facts taken together appear to corroborate this notion of a racial swap. And in fact, you had Republican Party chairmen going into black districts and apologizing for the bigotry of the Republican Party. The big switch, in other words, was accepted by our side. And yet this big switch, as it turns out, is a lie. You can test it very simply by noticing that if you make a list of all the racist Democrats, the so-called Dixiecrats, Only one of them, I emphasize one, Strom Thurmond, switched to the Republican Party. All the others remained in the Democratic Party. It is true that blacks switched over to the Democratic Party, but this didn't actually happen in the 60s, it happened in the 30s. Now in the 1930s, the Democratic Party was, by common acceptance, the party of segregation and the Ku Klux Klan. And so you had the very bizarre phenomenon of blacks leaving the party of Lincoln to join the party of the Klan. Why would they do that? The answer has to do with the extreme economic hardships of the Depression, in which blacks took the economic benefits promised, not really delivered, but promised by FDR, over the idea of racial liberation. And as for the white South, the white South moved to the Republican Party in the late 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. It culminated really in the Reagan era. And it was Reagan's appeal to patriotism, anti-communism, free markets. This is actually what peeled off the non-racist South into the Republican Party. The point I'm trying to make is that as the South became less racist, it became more Republican. Now, the importance of these arguments going forward is that the left is going to come back in the way it always does. And it's going to come back not just with organization and money, but by claiming the moral high ground, by attempting to stigmatize Trump and put him sort of beyond the pale. If we can take away the moral argument from the left, we take away its chief claim to rule, and we expose it for the party that it truly is. I've been hearing in the last day or so a lot of ideas about how we go forward and what do we need to do, particularly with regard to the left's continuing domination of Hollywood, academia, and the media. And the temptation is to try to fight these things by escalating the things that we are already doing. And I want to emphasize why I think that's not enough. Because think of something like speaking on campus, something that Milo's doing so effectively now. I've been doing it for 25 years on the campus. But speaking on campus is a hit and run project. You speak on Tuesday, you're gone on Wednesday. The professors live there. They control that environment. And it's no accident that so many young people come to college and they jettison their conservative, their Christian, their religious values, and they defect to the other side. That's part of the project of what these professors are dedicated to do. And so the question you have to ask is not, can we introduce a modicum of conservative thought for 5 minutes to get people to see that there is another side in the world, but what is the way to shake the happy complacency of that liberal professor who feels currently accountable to no one? That guy doesn't care about the legislature. He doesn't care about the parents. He could care less about the administration, which has no power over him. He doesn't even care about the alumni because he knows at the end of the day, they're going to give money based upon their wonderful nostalgic experience, not based upon what's going on now. So we need a supply side type of answer that shakes the complacency of the ordinary professor on the ordinary campus. And short of that, we're not going to make deep inroads into the college campus. My own view is that the campuses are sort of gone. And by that I mean there is no way to take them back. The solution actually has to be far more dramatic. It essentially involves creating new types of education that can deliver high quality education at a low cost. The Achilles heel of the campus is in the precarious financial structure that is now unsustainable. And so if using technology, there is a way to create, let's call it the academic iPhone, in which you're able to deliver very good education for 1/5 of the price, you will shake to the foundations the core of American higher education. In my own career, I've pivoted from being a think tank guy and a campus speaker to making movies. In the field of documentaries, I'm doing pretty well. I've kind of overtaken poor Michael Moore. It was really fun to see how he couldn't even get his latest movie into the theater. I mean, he got it in a couple of theaters in New York, but he couldn't even sell tickets. He had people seeing it for free. In any event, let's remember, though, that Michael Moore is not the big guy in Hollywood. The big guy in Hollywood is Steven Spielberg. And the most powerful messages from the left come through romantic comedies, thrillers, horror films, animated family films. Long term, if we're going to plant a conservative flag in Hollywood, we have to do that. We have to make feature films that can compete with Hollywood on its own high ground. Right now, the overwhelming feeling I think that I have, and I think many in this room, isn't even so much a sense of joy as it is a sense of relief. This was a big missile, a big bullet that this country so narrowly avoided. I don't even think most Americans quite realize that. Ours is the party at the end of the day that champions the American dream. My wife Debbie, who's here, is from Venezuela. I'm from India. Coming to America for us has been coming to a country where we can be the architects of our own destiny, where we can be in the driver's seat of our own life, where our future and our destiny isn't given to us but constructed by us. And the Republican Party has been and is now the party to hold up those ladders of opportunity that make it so possible for the guy at the bottom to make a better life. That's the vision that we're committed to. That is a very appealing vision. I teach weekly now, this is part of my sentence, I teach English to adult Hispanic immigrants once a week in the southern part of San Diego. And the conservative vision, well articulated, can make enormous headway with blacks, with Hispanics. I see no reason over the next 12 years why the Republican Party can't get 30% of the black vote, 50% of the Hispanic vote. With those kinds of numbers, the conservative viewpoint and the Republican Party would be the majority party, stretching as far as we can see into the future. So we are grateful to Trump for having opened the door, and now it is our job to go through it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. A lot of you may not realize this, but my first job out of college was actually working for David Horowitz. It was 1987. I graduated from college. I was reading National Review. I loved Bill Buckley, still do. I wore the blue blazer with the gold buttons, and I still remember the first meeting with David Horowitz. Here comes a guy wearing jeans, a belt buckle, and cowboy boots. My first thought was, I didn't know Horowitz was from Texas. But the best part was the t-shirt. The t-shirt said boldly, "I'd rather be killing communists." So that was my introduction to David Horowitz. So I worked for David on the Second Thoughts project, and I'm very thankful that I was. Let me just talk to you a little bit about the Clinton Foundation investigation that is ongoing. I'll share with you what I can and why I think it is so vitally important that this investigation proceed. Right now, there's a lot of political pressure, basically from the mainstream media and others, saying, let the Clinton Foundation investigation go. In the sake of national unity, we need to just let this go and, not take out vengeance on the Clintons. My response is this has nothing to do with vengeance. It has to do with accountability. Now think about this. Think about this for a second. One of Donald Trump's signature lines was, "The system is rigged." Let's just walk through the scenarios of Tuesday night. Because if Hillary Clinton had won on Tuesday night, we all know that there would not have been an honest investigation of Hillary Clinton. But now they're saying that Hillary Clinton lost. There should be no honest investigation of Hillary Clinton. That, to me, is the definition of a rigged system, a system which says powerful individuals should not face justice, they should not face investigation, and in a sense, it's kind of like what we have on Wall Street, but in this case, it's too big to jail. In other words, if you are a powerful political figure and you are on the cusp of national power, you can basically get away with what you want to because we need to, after all, not pursue investigations in the name of national unity. I think that's a ridiculous standard and needs to be resisted. And I'm going to explain to you in a minute why I think it's so important, because this is about something far more than just Bill and Hillary Clinton. Now, you may have read last week on the front page of the Wall Street Journal that the FBI is investigating the Clinton Foundation, that was based in the beginning stages on my book, Clinton Cash. This has been going on actually since the summer of 2015 and was not really in a position to talk about it publicly. But essentially, here is what you've had for the last roughly year and a half. You've had 5 FBI field offices investigating the Clinton Foundation. The field office in Los Angeles, the field office in Little Rock, Arkansas, Miami, Florida, New York, and Washington, D.C. And in addition to that, you have the FBI's foreign office in Lagos, Nigeria, investigating the Clinton Foundation. So the media wants to spin it that this was just sort of a last-minute thing, that these FBI agents had a Clinton Cash book club, and they decided, hey, let's charge her. That's not the case. The book Clinton Cash was the roadmap, is the way it was described to me by FBI officials. It was the roadmap that helped lay out the methodology. But the FBI, as you would expect, has gone far beyond that in its investigations. And what they have basically had since the end of February, when they presented evidence to the Department of Justice, is they have been roadblocked. The investigations continue, but the Department of Justice has denied them basic tools of investigation, like subpoenas, for example. So the question for an incoming Trump administration is, should we give the FBI the tools to investigate the Clinton Foundation? And I think the only answer can be yes. The only answer can be yes. And by the way, the evidence is in Clinton Cash, but anybody that has been reading the Podesta emails, anybody here been reading the Podesta emails? I have to say, when I first started reading them, I felt a little bit like I was a drug addict, like I was taking crack cocaine, because at first I thought I'm reading things that, are private emails, but every morning I just kept waiting for the next hit. I couldn't take it. But what do we know from the Podesta email? Well, just take one document which confirms everything that has been talked about and that has now been admitted by the Clinton Foundation. During Hillary Clinton's tenure as Secretary of State, Chelsea Clinton, to her credit, asked for an internal review of the Clinton Foundation in 2011. And that review was done by Simpson Thacher, the large New York law firm, very powerful, very prestigious. And they did an internal review of the Clinton Foundation. You can go read it online, and I would encourage you to do it. What did that investigation find? That investigation found, and I quote, that high-dollar Clinton Foundation donors had expectations of a quid pro quo in return for large gifts. That's not me saying that. That's the internal review of the Clinton Foundation done. By the way, they also went to Clinton Foundation employees and asked them to evaluate the effectiveness of their own organization. Now, of course, Hillary Clinton in the debates talked about how proud she was, how great the wonderful work that the Clinton Foundation does. What did this internal review find that what Clinton Foundation employees felt about the effectiveness of the organization? They were asked to rate it on a scale from 1 to 10. The highest rating that the foundation received from its own employees was a 4. In fact, this is all in the Simpson-Thacher report. In fact, numerous Clinton Foundation employees gave it a 1 when asked to rate its effectiveness. So the debate about the Clinton Foundation is over, and now the question is, will justice be done? Let me just say in closing why I think this is so important and why this is about more than Bill and Hillary Clinton. Now, look, in Clinton land, in the Clinton orbit, we recognize that because of some inherent narcissism, they think everything is about them. This investigation is about Bill and Hillary Clinton, but it's about a lot more than that. Because what the Clintons have done is created an unprecedented model for self-enrichment. And if this is not investigated and investigated fairly and in a detailed way by the FBI, and if justice is not done, this will be imitated, not just by Democrats. There is no reason, if this is allowed to stand, why we will not have a Secretary of Defense, a Republican or a Democrat, 5 years from now, 7 years from now, that sets up a private foundation, and while they're setting defense policy, takes large checks from overseas interests, and why that Secretary of Defense does not put their spouse on the lecture circuit collecting large checks from foreign governments. There's simply no reason not to do it. And if they are criticized about it, they're going to use the Clinton defense and say the Clintons were allowed to do it, why not Al? So at the end of the day, justice needs to be done. It's about accountability. Nobody is too big to jail. And this is about something far more than just Bill and Hillary Clinton. This is about the integrity of our political system and whether we want a government that is of and for and by the people, or a government run by individuals who are getting rich with the help of foreign oligarchs. Thank you very much.
I want to take the American view of corruption. I cannot endorse more full-heartedly what Peter's just said about accountability and the Clinton thing. And I want to point out at the beginning that when I talk about equal justice under the law, which is a concept that we have all lost apparently, and we must restore, that the Justice Department under Eric Holder, who last night was on Bill Maher, talking about his heroic efforts to stop whatever it was. And all I could keep thinking was, every time there was an investigation, he would appoint lawyers who had contributed money to the Obama campaign. And the only person I know they persecuted, not prosecuted, but persecuted for for doing political wrong fundraising is sitting here. If you don't think that's about an enemies list and about using enemies list, you know nothing about the truth of the Obama administration. I like to remind people that I was the youngest person on Richard Nixon's enemies list, and I expected fully that I might well be the oldest person on Hillary Clinton's if the election had turned out. My values did not change. I got a very good sense of what I thought about government corruption. Too bad, too many people, including people I remember from the McGovern campaign, people like Tony Podesta and others, somehow had lost their memory about what they should. But anyway, not to get on to that, but I do want to say one thing. I didn't get a chance because they weren't there yesterday morning. They were at camp. My grandchildren, everyone keeps asking me about who you've now seen. They're here, my daughter, stand-up children. They are really the adopted children of this thing. Olivia, wave Olivia, Kate, my youngest, and Travis, my middle grandson, who will be 10 on Tuesday, which was, by the way, 10 years ago Tuesday, I was flying to here, to Breakers, to Palm Beach, from LA, where I then still lived. And I was intercepted in Dallas, changing planes, by Liz Ruiz's husband to tell me that Travis was coming too early, was coming a week early, and they had booked me wonderfully to head right to Charleston, which I did too late. He was really ready to go. This kid's a go-getter. And he was already done. And then I came back here, some of you may be here that long, with a picture proving I flew back here and talked and breakfast and held up his picture. So he is literally kind of a restoration weekend baby, if you will. Anyway, so but I want to go on to one other thing. When I watched Bill Maher last night, I watched Anna Maria Cox talking about fascism, about the Trump as a National Socialist Nazi, and Tom Friedman of the New York Times saying he promised these people he would help them, but they're all gone anyway, and so is much of the, and we just need to adjust to the future. And by the way, he should pick up all of my ideas and do what we tell him to do. And then David Axelrod, who tried to kind of point out a little bit that it was an election, but they all came to one agreement. The new word that I had never heard pass any of their lips was the word corruption. And that is the word in Washington political class, which in other words were not allowed to be spoken. Even though, as I've seen and Rasmussen has seen for years, when you rate the issues, it often ranks second. But anyway, they were talking about the Trump and corruption that need to be investigated and the media's duty, which I'll get to. But I want to just touch very quickly on 5 corruptions that need to be spoken of. One is the corruption of the political process, and that involves, and I want to start, 1998, I wrote a op-ed piece for the Wall Street Journal called "The Death of Liberal Outrage." This is during the impeachment, which I was not in favor of. I was for censoring Clinton. Actually, I thought he should have the grace to resign. But in any event, and my point was the Ricky Rector case and how the Clintons didn't mind killing people but helped their political careers, a long subject that Willie Morris had talked about in the New Yorker. And I said, I just found it again, reread it, and it's in spades today. He said and what Clinton has done to the Democratic Party and the politics, the Clintons. I said that what Bill Clinton has meant is that liberals and progressives have had to hollow out their moral consciences and values in order to fit into that tiny moral black hole that is Bill Clinton's sense of morality. And I realized, my God, how much more has been absorbed in the years since then, when the Democratic Party, not a single person but my associate Doug Schoen on Political Insiders, would speak about corruption. The question is, why would they have ever nominated her? Why did nobody stand up and say, this is a party where people stood up against Lyndon Johnson, a very powerful president, on Vietnam because it was a matter of conscience. Not a single Democrat, as far as I know of leadership, ever got up and said, what are we doing? Even Bernie Sanders, I'm going to talk about the issues, not your damn emails, whatever, and then goes right in the tank. I mentioned Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, who took the powder in the election, as though character wasn't an issue. That missing word, the word that could not be spoken, that donkey in the room, if you will, which was never to be addressed by the media until now. Now you'll hear a lot about media response. But that is one corruption, and it started, by the way, and Bernie Sanders was rigged out of the Democratic nomination, which was led to the coronation. I just tell you, it began in Iowa. I said, with Neil Cavuto on sitting there analyzing the night of Iowa, this primaries, this caucus is being stolen. They have disappeared ballots here, and they know what the results are, but they will not release the numbers. The Des Moines Register went crazy demanding that they do a recount. Somehow in the middle of the night, some of the precincts disappeared. And the next morning, the chairman announced that Hillary Clinton had barely won, and Bernie Sanders, like a fool he is, accepted it instead of drawing right there and then. If you're not going to play for real, don't get in this game and fight. And what we discovered is the chairman, who the Des Moines Register pointed out has a license tag, who had been a Hillary volunteer in 08, a staff member, and who had a license plate on her car, HRC 16. And she was doing a very, like the rest of the Democratic establishment, a very even-handed, fair process. So that political corruption is really deep, and it goes even in the Republican Party, which I noticed, none of the congressional committees ever managed to do what Tom Fenton and Judicial Watch did. None of them ever came up with what Peter Schweizer came up with. These Republicans, either out of incompetence or purpose, the Benghazi investigation, which could not have been worsely handled, not so much by Gowdy, but by former Speaker Boehner, who did not want certain topics discussed. There was no counsel. The most investigative committees like that have chief counsels who handled the investigation. So we had a bunch of congressmen, and it wasn't until we got to Jim Jordan, who was the star of the thing, did we find out about, instead of leading off with Hillary Clinton's, the fact that she had had a different conversation with her daughter, the prime minister of Egypt and whoever else on the videos, that whole entire lie. Washington has become a place of bipartisan corruption and lies. And you can see it after the last midterm, when in the great December, let's get behind closed doors and pay off our contributors in both parties, they decided to raise, Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell raised the limits for the two-party giving so that you people could give up to, I think, $500,000 or whatever, but allowed no contributions other than $2,500 to third-party candidates, which will tell you about why we have a process where 31% of the voters, actually the plurality of Americans, are not even mentioned, because the rigged system goes on. And don't kid yourself, your people are just as bad as the Democrats for this. And until you start, and that is why Donald Trump is president of the United States. If people want that stables clean, they want that city wiped out, and they want it in both parties. But these people in the leadership believe they are just going to capture Trump and go on as usual, and they will screw you just like they have been trying to, as they have done for the last 10 years. Just make that point. The other corruption, quickly, the Clinton corruption, there is not enough to say. Read the book, read everything. But the mere fact that this woman could appear and 27 times tell the FBI she couldn't remember because she had had brain damage or whatever, and so she couldn't remember, or why her lawyers hammered away all of the machinery and got rid of it, and the FBI agreed to help. Then we find out the person handling the investigation is a recipient of another person under federal investigation, Governor Terry McAuliffe, who gave this gentleman's, what's his name? Yes, gave his wife $600,000 to $700,000 in contributions for her race. And they met with McAuliffe, and they met with Hillary for that matter. But that was not a conflict of interest. I mean, he should have exempted himself. This place is rotten beyond belief. And to endorse what Peter said about independent counsel, one of the most important things is they be from outside that swamp hell that is Washington. Nobody in Washington is going to clean that place out, because everybody is compromised for the most part, with a handful of exceptions. The presidential corruptions which have not been dealt with, the Republicans laid down on, whether it was the IRS, remember, Obama's going to get to the bottom of it. I can tell you, if we had the time, what the facts are, starting with Anita Dunn's husband coming in as the White House counsel, and the head of the IRS suddenly visiting the White House several hundred times, or whatever it was, as they pursued people. The worst moral one of all, the Veterans Department. Remember this? People are dying, but we can't do anything about it because Hillary Clinton says we can't really do anything because we have to pay off the unions, and the government unions, particularly the AFSCME, doesn't want to touch because it would influence their unions. And once again, we have veterans who've given to their country dying, and nobody goes to jail, nobody even gets fired, really, instead of cleaning house. And that is bipartisan as well. They talk about it, but nobody does anything. And except, I suspect Donald Trump will. And finally, the point about, I want to say, the other great corruption in this society is the media corruption. If you do not understand that the media has now become, as I have said before, have chosen to make themselves the enemy of the American people by their biased coverage. I mentioned this the other day, that a vast majority of Americans believe that they are a threat to the people's right to know and a threat to democracy. And that this, by poll, we need to have this discussion about them, because they had several days, I don't even want to mention some, but there was no place on television where anyone was not saying, well, nobody could see what was coming, therefore it's okay that the pollsters were cheating. And by the way, and in the case of the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, doing unethical behavior with the releasing of polls and partial polls, that they were trying desperately to insist that Hillary had it wrapped up to depress the Trump vote. All of this and so much more. But now they're going to go. I will listen to that. I listened to a discussion on several of the networks talking about, well, our job now in the media, of course, we had some problems, but we need to go on now and investigate Trump and keep his feet to the fire and go after them. Oh, because suddenly now you're going to think about doing your job? No, you're not. You're still acting as an agents of and outriders of a political party, and you have no interest in justice or truth. And until that is changed, and I'm glad Trump won't let them ride on the airplane. When they start acting like the defenders of the American people, then they should be treated like they have rights. They have no rights otherwise. And you can see that when Bill Maher can be on television 27 times a week or more from Time Warner. And that is not, as I had tried to explain to Sean Hannity once, that is not free speech. That is paid speech, paid for by you and every HBO subscriber without any balance whatsoever. And I'll tell you the problem with, if that was on the other side, I'll tell you what, Time Warner would be so threatened with boycotts and people leaving that they would do something about it. But Republicans and conservatives, you know, this is nice time. You don't know how to stand up and fight. And maybe Trump will teach you how to do it. And finally, the last point, college corruption. There is a simple, easy answer to what Dinesh was asking about and talking about. And by the way, you don't have to, it's very simple. And I said this a couple of years ago, I've said a couple of sessions, and I hope that now that Donald Trump is president, they will simply invoke Title IX and issue a guidance, just like they did on transgender bathrooms and locker rooms, and saying, which threatening to take money from schools, and merely say that any institution that takes federal funds found violating the First Amendment or attempting to restrict the freedom of speech will be cut off from all federal funding immediately. The minute that is done, you know, sometimes the hardest problems are the easiest solved. And this is an easy one. The minute you use that tool that is there, you will shut down the safe spots and all the other stuff going on the campuses. And then we should get into the question of diversity of thinking, not just simply diversity of bodies and colors. And then, you know, they want the money, they should at least adhere to some standards and some values that are held by all real Americans, which is the vast majority of anyone who doesn't live inside the Beltway or in the political and media classes. Thank you.
Pat, going back to what you just said, what do you think it's going to take to follow your advice on cutting out that 501c and making those things that everybody in America knows?
You got to hold them. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, better. Yeah.
What do we have to do to follow your advice on the 501c to make sure that these colleges are acting in their proper manner in order for them to get the deductions?
It's very simple. Make sure that Donald Trump gets the right Secretary of Education who's not interested in being popular with the unions or taking a presidency. Make sure that is somebody who understands that they have, and that the president-elect understands he has that kind of power. If you want to do something quick in America, there's something quick. I meant to say one thing about congressional corruption. My good friend Peter here, he was into the insider trading with CBS and stuff. They always attack him as a right-winger. He has worked with the Washington Post and the New York Times until they realize, oh shoot, we can't get into this Hillary thing. This is really bad, this foundation. But before, with CBS, on 60 Minutes, on the Democrats and Republicans who were inside trading because it was legal so that they could take information and go to the stock market with it, including many of your own favorite people and many of my favorite Democrats. Anyway, he has been, just like Mr. Fenton has been, a Judicial Watch, the believer first in protecting America, and secondly, worrying about partisanship. I would like that to once again be our standard in America, that we are Americans first.
Mallory has a quick comment, then Barbara's question. Well, I've been standing up in these rooms for 25 years telling people that they're always talking about saving for their kids' college education. And I've been saying, don't send your kids to college. They're indoctrination mills, and after they've been there 6 months, they won't even look you in the eye anymore. I want to congratulate Dinesh on his unique and innovative idea. And I also want to suggest to people that we begin to put into active use the word fascism, because our enemies are fascists. These people who are in the streets of New York and all of these cities right now are brown shirts. They are just like the Nazis, and we have to call them fascists. Thank you.
Gentlemen, and everyone in this room, I'm sure, will concur that we're looking at Mount Olympus. Thank you. Each of you will become or are an icon in the history of the United States, because we were really over the precipice. There was no room left. We were hanging on by our fingernail. I have to ask you, Hillary Clinton, shall we lock her up when she is indicted?
Well, what I would say is, and this is what I've always said, is you need to have an honest, thorough, and clear FBI investigation. I'm not an attorney. I always say that, and it's true. But I think if the evidence leads that way, and on my reading it does, yes, I don't think that you should simply decide that, well, this individual is too powerful or too prominent. This is the problem on Wall Street. I mean, if you look back at the 2008 financial crisis and the emails that came out from Goldman Sachs executives and others, there's no question it was fraud. It was criminal fraud, and nobody went to jail. Goldman Sachs and other banks paid fine, but the assumption was these guys are too powerful, too prominent, and too rich to go to jail. That's happening in the political sphere now, and so I think if the evidence points to that and she is indicted, and that's what a jury decides, yes, absolutely.